think we're live. So hello everybody. My name's Michael Power, and thank you for joining the panel and I for a chat about Omnichannel at the Mobile Ecosystem Forum Connect's Rich Communications event. This will be an interactive session, so feel free to send in your questions using the chat window off to the side, and we'll answer any of the questions as we go. One of the major takeaways from 2020 has been that engagement through messaging channels has been critical to maintaining contact with customers and continuing to provide a good service throughout these really challenging times. Especially so when you consider that many of the traditional ways of doing business have been either reduced in their capacity or in some cases removed altogether. As we saw from Nick Lane of Mobilesquared yesterday, messaging in general has seen a huge surge, with traditional channels like SMS and voice proving invaluable for maintaining contact, but also WhatsApp has seen a huge surge in use, as well as the other rich channels looking to be, or at least forecast to be, well used within the very near future, and not far behind where we are with WhatsApp today. We've also seen a huge rise in the use of bot platforms, customer service applications, multi-channel messaging solutions, and CPaaS platforms, which cater for everything from SMS to WhatsApp, RCS, Messenger, and all the other channels relevant to the demographics and geographic regions we all work in. All these options and the fantastic engagement opportunities that they present, this really has paved the way for Omnichannel. At first, probably more so as a strategy, but what we're starting to see now is a range of tangible products that enable you to pull all those different channels and services together and orchestrate conversations across multiple channels to create seamless and excellent customer experiences. In the next hour, the panel and I hope to be able to give you all you need to know about Omnichannel, the common use cases, where the all-important return on investment comes from, but ultimately we want you to leave with an understanding of if Omnichannel is right for you and your organization, then what the next steps are for you to take that next step. Before we get into the panel though, I'm going to hand over to Matt Ramerman, President of Sinch for Marketing. Matt's going to frame the conversation for us with one of the conundrums that's driving the need for smarter customer engagement, and give you three key components to consider when developing your strategy. Matt, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you, Michael. And if you could just verify that I've got my screen live.
It's looking live, yeah, we look good.
All right, off to a good start. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our session, and welcome to the full panel today. Looking forward to this conversation. Today I just want to share three thoughts, and I hope to be as provocative as possible around this concept of driving engagement on any channel that we may choose on this ever important concept of mobile. And to begin, I really want to echo the voice of the consumer and do that through the context of a paradox that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and one that I believe will be really familiar to everybody that's listening to this presentation today. And that paradox, I think, is really important to consider relative to this concept of engagement, but also important to consider as we begin to step into this concept of omnichannel, and more important, channels that lead to this point with the consumer called mobile. And the paradox is this: on one side, we've got some negative attribution around marketing and enterprise communications to consumer, and they take lots of forms, whether it's lack of trust, whether that's frankly ignoring the outbound messages, or frankly a dislike of advertising altogether. And frankly, we as an industry are largely to blame that this concept of trying to connect, create engagement with consumers has been really done through frequency and recency and hitting consumers from multiple directions. The overwhelming bombardment of messages has resulted in a strong callous by consumers who are ignoring the messages. But the paradox is this: on the other side, we are consuming societies. We deeply desire information about new goods and services. So there's this tension between ignoring the messages we're sending, but yet the other side, consumers overwhelmingly wanting to hear from the enterprise. What hangs in the balance, the connection point, is one that I'm sure is already top of mind for all of you, which is, well, shoot, the information just needs to be relevant or personalized and we can build the bridge. But the obvious answer is the truth, and that if we can make this connection between relevance and personalization, then brands and enterprise have the opportunities to build something that is unfortunately in great short supply in our world, which is around trust. And as we build the bridge of trust, then comes the all-important business metrics that we all seek so eagerly. Just yesterday, I found this quite amusing considering our topic. Drew Kerr is a very well-known PR person in New York City, wrote a note to us, to the industry, around what's happening relative to just the floodgates of messages that are permeating his inbox. And as Drew points out, this is something that was happening before the pandemic, but in the midst of the pandemic, it seems to be getting really worse, where that the oversaturation of messages isn't resulting in an opt-out, it's actually resulting in churn, where consumers are actually rejecting brands. So what do we do about all this? And so I have 3 pieces of advice, and this is no way, shape, or form the end all for solving the engagement problems, but I do believe it's a foundational starting point to have deeper discussions around strategy. First and foremost, good news is in face of our omni-channel conversation is that we are in the right place, that consumers, as we all know, are beginning and ending their digital life on their mobile device. And so for us, it's about trying to find the right and correct way to engage consumers where we know they live. But the thing I would ask everyone to consider is all of these omni-channels, before we get the permission to engage consumers on this channel, is a space in which these consumers have primarily reserved for their closest friends and family to share the most personal moments of their lives. And getting invited into this channel comes with great privilege. So a few just considerations, one of which is, and today we'll spend a great deal of time talking about the various channels and opportunities to engage the consumers. And I will take maybe a more provocative stand and say, omni-channel shouldn't mean all, it should mean the right channels to connect with your consumer depending on your brand and your market that you're in. And as you get the opportunity to engage those consumers on those channels, I would just urge all enterprises to remember that this is a privileged channel. This channel shouldn't be just simply additional distribution for business as usual messaging, but one that should be reserved for more personalized and tailored messages against your consumer, because as we all know, this is a place, a digital connection spot where consumers are paying close attention. Sinch, my parent company, just hot off the press, completed a pretty extensive 2,800 person consumer global survey looking at this issue of engagement, particularly in the midst of our changing landscape because of COVID. And the good news for all of us across all age segments and across multiples of use cases and verticals, majority of consumers all see great value in driving connections with enterprise against messaging. So willingness across the board to engage with us on one of these channels that we're going to be discussing today. Second piece of advice is to start to consider the content itself in which you're pushing to consumers. And we would say that these channels have the ability to deliver on rich content, video, and other rich media formats. And the good news for us as enterprises and for consultants working with enterprises that these formats can deliver a tremendous amount of efficiency as compared to text content. And video and other points of rich media also deliver on great ability to remove complexity, to make things simple, and also a stronger ability to leverage emotion in order to make that connection with consumers. And bottom line, video can drive much higher recall rate than its text companion. And the last piece of advice, which I'm sure is not a surprise, considering all I've said about these channels, is the importance of personalization. And, you know, simply said, from our view, given the incredible intimate and personal relationship that consumers have with their mobile device, in our opinion, dictates that the content in which you send has also been personalized and tailored to that user. And, you know, the good news for us is that with personalization comes tremendous return and connections with consumers. Again, back to the Sinch research that we just recently completed, as we look across age segments, we see a high propensity and expectation, frankly, for personalization depending on which age segment you're in. I wouldn't misread this. I wouldn't say that older segments don't want to have content personalized. I just think the expectation might be lower, considering their maybe relative engagement with various digital content. What I can tell you, having been in the mobile personalization business for a better part of a decade, is that the penalty for not personalizing, as my friend Drew Kerr suggested, it isn't just simply an opt-out or the channel being closed. We've seen that if content's not personalized mobile, the consumers will actually switch brands. And then if we also look at what's the opportunity for engagement across use cases and across segments, the good news is that there is a tremendous opportunity gap with consumers not yet seeing the level of engagement they desire from mobile channels, but a deep desire to have those channels open to them. So in my final few minutes, I thought I would just share a couple of examples bringing to life this concept of leveraging rich media, personalizing that content to the end user, and frankly, the benefit of moving from more of a text-based medium to one that is more rich media. And so the example you're seeing on the left is a text message we've all received many times, which is simply a flight notification confirming the gate and departure time. But the object on the right is, what if we reconceive this and we personalize the content not only to the traveler, in this case Nathaniel, but we also included some useful information for, in this case, to prepare Nathaniel for his trip to San Francisco by providing some weather information. So we've taken a utility experience, we're able to inject brand, and we're also able to inject additional elements of information that will benefit Nathaniel on his trip. And then one last example we've had to mask the brand, but this is a use case involving retail and over the messaging channel MMS. And so what was a simple text message engaging a customer to talk about perhaps a flash sale, the suggestion on our side is, well, what if we personalize that? What if we leveraged video and we're able to directly address our particular consumer? And then perhaps we also featured an item that we know that this consumer is interested in, either from seeing them like it as a favorite on the website or perhaps even abandon it in their cart. And so this is what this could possibly look like.
Hey, John. Cloak is here to help you beat the heat with hot new styles from Columbia. Come in today and get 20% off Columbia shorts and swimwear for men. Summer in style with clothes made well.
So thank you so much for the time and opportunity to share some perspective, and really excited to hear from the rest of the panel on this subject.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Matt. That's awesome. And I think it really does start to illustrate the opportunity that we have with being able to pull all these different channels together, the video, being able to embed images. But before we get into all of that, let's do a quick round of introductions. So just so people can put voices to faces. Glen, do you want to kick us off if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. So Glen Murray, I'm the SVP of Global Sales at WIT Software. I've been in the messaging industry for over 25 years now. No sign of any time off or good behavior at all across that time. So I'm still working on that. WIT's a software company who mostly known for RCS products. We have a full stack suite of RCS products from the client protocol stacked RCS applications on devices, RCS application servers, map gateways. But most relevant to this session, we also have the WIT conversation platform, which is a chatbot hosting for Omnichannel, including all the messaging channels that we integrate into voice and video, existing voice and video scenarios today as well, to provide an Omnichannel automated solution.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Hello there, my name is Sergei Loukine. I'm working as a consultant for Mobilesquared. You all know Mobilesquared, but we recently have been working on messaging map, which actually quite interesting proposition. It gives you a snapshot of all different messaging channels in given country, and gives you a good understanding of the channels and how they behave, and how to work with them in a country. We thought that it would be interesting for us to participate in omni-channel discussions today.
Rick, do you want to?
Hi there, my name's Rick. Currently looking at Matt's slides, I represent the millennials today. It's a pleasure to be here. I work for Chatlayer.ai, a Sinch company. I spent the last 10 years basically in the interchange between enterprises and innovation in the startup world. First in banking, then in strong authentication, and in the last 2 years in conversational AI. And I truly believe that we're at the forefront of a huge transformation where a lot of enterprises will go from native mobile apps into conversational apps. And with our platform, our conversational AI platforms, through chatbots, voice bots, etc., we want to be part of that revolution.
Hi all, John Campbell, again representing Sinch. I'm a product director at Sinch, looking after our rich messaging portfolio. So for those not in the industry, for me, rich messaging represents all the fun stuff, the fun, glossy, rich media formats of two-way messaging outside of traditional voice, SMS, etc. So that's what we provide. Matt.
Thank you.
My next.
Yeah, do you want to just give us, I mean, we've heard from you already, but go on, give us a quick intro to your role within Sinch.
Yeah, thanks. So as you heard, I get the privilege of working with a team within Sinch that's focused on working with marketers and major enterprises, and probably no surprise, our focus is driving greater engagement with enterprise consumers, leveraging our personalized messaging platform, and our parent company, in which our platform sits on top of their network. This is Sinch, that provides enterprises with connections to operators around the world.
Great stuff. Right, well, thank you for that, everybody, and well, thank you for joining us on this panel today. So let's kick off really with a bit of a starting point, just to define what omnichannel is, try and provide a little bit more clarity for perhaps anyone who's listening, who's heard it as a buzzword, but as I say, it's become more tangible. So Who wants to go first and kick us off with a bit about Omnichannel and perhaps why we believe it's important to organizations today? One. Who's first?
I'll go. I would say that, you know, we look at Omnichannel as adding all the messaging channels together, or not together, but combining them with web, voice, and video being the best way to, rather than just messaging it, combines the other media into that. That's the way we look at it.
I would just add to it that, you know, we're not inventing a new term here, right? Omnichannel is a term that's been used by the marketing industry for years. For those direct marketeers that try to switch from the old direct mail to then to email and so forth. So omnichannel is something that's been around for a long time that I think the mobile industry has adopted, but we're reinventing parts of that because it has new meaning, because it's moving at such a fast pace. So now with all these new channels that are coming on board, your consumers, you have access to multiple channels in different geographies, but much more tangible feedback as to, did it land? Did they read it? Did they open it? How long did they spend on it? And then now you're opening a front door for them to come back to your brand, not just at the point of you first blasting something out, but a day later, 2 days later. So omnichannel, I think, has changed over time, but it's certainly not something new.
Most importantly, actually, I wanted to mention that your mobile device is the device that have all the omnichannel capabilities. So you have everything in your hands, and you can really choose the channel that you want to be engaged on.
Are you finding that the data, I mean, Sergei, obviously working with Mobilesquared, where are you guys sat on this at the moment from a data perspective? Does it support brands moving now towards omnichannel strategies, or should people be, you know, is it very much early adopter? Should people be waiting perhaps if they're a bit more established?
Well, the brands definitely are looking at the omnichannels at the next steps in the strategy. They're looking at the now the all mobile channels are very important for them, especially because of the COVID and what's happening now. So it's it is a very important step for many businesses, and they are going ahead with the strategy really.
Is it demonstrating a return on investment, or is it more just it's something that brands are having to do because their traditional methods of perhaps communicating with customers have either been restricted or removed, so is it something that people are having to do by necessity, or actually is this really generating a return on investment and perhaps
it will generate a return on investment, because actually if you look at the consumer market, more and more people are on a mobile device, and actually mobile devices, as I mentioned, have all the channels that brands are looking at to be engaged with, and that's this is especially for the new generation. Really, you probably have mobile device only as a device that provides you with all the types of engagement with the consumers.
How does that work? I mean, as you say, all these channels are on mobile devices. How do we then, in an omni-channel future where we've got these platforms, is someone messaging on 2 channels? Is that 2 people? Is it 1 person? Or how have any of you experienced that point where actually you're having to decide whether 2 conversations are a single person or separate people? How do you go about tackling that?
Yeah, just in certain markets, we've seen evidence. Japan's a good example, where working with the operators there, they encourage people to choose the channel of choice. So you get proposed via a web interface for customer care, usual scenario, you get to choose your own channel. So your chart about millennials to boomers to Gen X, Gen Y, people will choose the most comfortable channel. So they allow people to literally click on the logo of the messaging platform they want to use for the communications, and that becomes the platform that you typically then follow up and use. The learnings, etc., exist within that platform as they go through it, but they allow the end user to choose, and that's just one example in Japan.
I think Glen makes a good point, where we certainly see different consumers choosing different channels that fits their particular preferences. But we've not seen a concept where a consumer starts an interaction, let's say on WhatsApp, and then continues the customer service inquiry, the same inquiry, yet on a different channel like SMS. My view is that that particular consumer or that particular segment will choose that channel, and that will be their channel of choice to engage with the brand. Which leads me to kind of maybe a bit of a provocative statement, is I don't know that for the average enterprise and the average market, omnichannel means all, meaning the enterprise to be delivering good service needs to engage every channel imaginable. But I do think they need to engage the handful of channels that make sense for their brand and their market.
That's a great point. I think you've just raised there. So actually the demographics of your customer base perhaps drive the channels that you need to use. Is that a fair comment based on that?
Yeah. I think just to close off though on the channel, the beautiful thing about omni-channel definition is it's so broad, right? And that includes voice. So the only counter I would say to Matt's point is that the classic use case, and it ties to your ROI question, Michael, is that we all hate call centers. We all hate sitting on an IVR. And the classic use case that is growing so fast today is you dial in, and instead of waiting on there, the prompt is so powerful to say, would you like to continue this conversation on WhatsApp? Do you want to move this conversation to Apple Business Chat? And that, knowing who I am, John's on the call, this was his pain point, and then moving the context of that call into that given channel. And then, yes, I think Matt's point still stands true of that WhatsApp conversation may not switch to SMS or Line or something else later on. It'll stay there. But knowing that person, taking the context from voice to chat, has absolute ROI that I think anyone on this call can resonate with, that I don't want to sit on IVR. I could actually enjoy this panel with you while trying to sort out my utility bill on a chat at the same time, right? That's the beautiful of that asynchronous conversation.
Better said, John. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe a short thing I would like to add is that on that as well, 10 years ago when I was advising banks, they were talking about omnichannel, that was going from bricks and mortars to a mobile app. Then we saw when launching that mobile app, they basically had to make a choice. Do we do it on Android, do it on Apple, or do it on a Windows phone? Basically Android and Apple made it. But nowadays, if I talk to those same institutions, they basically have a private banking branch or a brand. They want to use Apple Business Chat because that's where their clients are, at least in Western Europe. They're all basically Apple iPhone users. But when they want to do the neobank version, which basically is the same bank behind, but just a different brand, they move that conversation completely to WhatsApp because that's basically where the youngsters are, and there are a lot of Android users in that spectrum, and Apple's business chat doesn't support that. So you see that basically on the segment that they're targeting, they're just choosing a completely different channel there.
I think to follow up on the point from John to the ROI, I think one of the problems with ROI is that you start out with the voice to, and John's smiling now because he knows this, you start out with a voice to chat conversion, and everyone starts building their ROI around the savings they're going to have on their IVR platforms. And that's really doing a huge disservice to the whole business case for moving to an omni-channel approach, because you're just trying to save money, whereas CMOs will stand up and say, we want to completely digitize this business, we have to do it, and then they try to save money on that first step. And that's, I think Mick yesterday from Direct said a very good thing, and that is messaging is inventory. It is part of the process is going to make the customer interaction better the next time that customer comes back. Getting a customer onto messaging is a great way to get knowledge and data about that interaction, how successful it was, and you can then help to make that better the next time with intelligence and AI applied to that.
So does that perhaps then tie in with how much appetite for future tech that maybe a customer has? So one brand, maybe actually the way for them to kind of build that initial business case is maybe around the ROI of, like say, saving money on the IVR, creating a better customer experience in a relatively simple use case, just by being able to move people from sitting on hold and moving over to messaging. Whereas if you've got a slightly more, maybe a bit more desire for future tech and experimenting with your customer journey, then actually that opens up a whole world of new opportunities. I think, who was it? There was, I think it was Michael Ritchie was saying yesterday about digital wallets, customer service, up and cross-selling, which probably leads us on to actually some of the use cases that you guys will have seen as you've been working with customers. Do you want to talk us through some of those use cases actually from both ends of the spectrums, like the safe, this is going to save me money, all the way up to perhaps a little bit more experimental, but again, I mean, well, we see the stats come out on previous use cases, but can I hand that over to you guys and just talk us through some of the use cases that you've implemented over the last few years? Hand that to you, Rick.
Sure. Well, I mean, we're a conversational AI platform, right? So you can do an awful lot of use cases. But the trend that I'm seeing in the last year is that you used to have that divide between marketing use cases and customer care use cases. Where now, when I speak to big enterprises, they basically have a person in charge for customer experience. And it's really in that angle in between, like acquisition, right? So reaching out to the client, but with relevant information, getting them completely through the whole, I would say, customer journey, and then follow up on them. What used to be part of a customer care kind of part in the organization, more a contact center, is that they want to give basically the same experience using conversational AI. Some good examples there. It can go really, really complex. Like, for instance, from the moment that you have an insurance claim that needs to be processed, right, with that insurance company that sold you that insurance 5 years ago, where no way you're going to download the mobile app every 5 years again and sign up and get registered, etc. So messaging and the conversational experience in that is a great way of dealing with that. So that's what we see on the one end. On the other end, we see just very simple cases, getting signups on certain information based on some basic user profiling to get people basically interested in something that you have to offer. So it's really that large range. And then in the last 6 months, there was also a lot going around with COVID, because the penetration rate in terms of messaging is so much higher than mobile apps, that also a lot of companies saw messaging as the prime way of basically communicating with a large audience and getting information out there in a quite frictionless way, so to speak. So that's what I've been seeing in the last 12 months, and it goes really broad. But you see a lot of the companies, they get an aha moment going from native mobile apps to conversational apps and investing in that, which has a lot of ROI directly, because you need to invest in a less heavy IT stack basically to get that done. You just need a channel.
Of course. And well, actually, that's an interesting point there. So with regards to the types of conversations, I know Glen and John, your platforms, maybe you guys can or speak to this, but are you seeing that when people are moving across to these almost like looking at app-like experiences within their messaging channels, is it a lot of conversation? Are you finding the channels that support images and videos, as we saw with Matt's video earlier, are you finding that those types of content are becoming more prevalent as you're talking to brands, or is it still very much at the moment more moving from keeping in a text-based environment?
I think from our perspective, no, everyone wants to move to more media, right? We're all consumers here, and we respond to that media much more enthusiastically. So I think people want to move away from that text-based very quickly. In that journey, a lot of the brands and customers we talk to actually are not sure as to how to start that journey, and from a common use case may not be completely functional or ROI, but we see a lot of brands just starting with discovery of another shop window to browse, whether it's gaming, retail, fashion, etc. Just another way to view into content and to start to build that affinity, emotional relationship with the customer in another angle. The one thing, to your point on the platform side, is that we impress upon the brand that's starting that journey, but don't forget you've provided a door now to your brand. That door can be discovered or gone back to 2 days, 10 days later. And if they say hi, you need to respond. And you need to respond in a meaningful way and not just, sorry, no one's here, or even worse still, an automated bot that doesn't quite understand what you're asking. So as soon as you start down this journey, you need to think about that inbound and how you will respond. And then that's where we're starting to get into the more meaningful discussions as to, oh, actually, so if they are engaging with us, how do we make that more meaningful, help them with whatever they're trying to solve? And also it's an opportunity for us now to start a discussion, a conversation, which to Matt's point is now personal, and we can start that journey again. So you do need those platforms to start building that response mechanism, whether it's AI, NLP driven from like Chatlayer's perspective, or quite functional, breaking into your enterprise systems as to completing a task of a payment or order update and providing a number that can identify what's going on. You just need to think about that journey on an inbound basis.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think video is obviously, with COVID times, video is going to become more and more important. I think everyone's more comfortable with using video now. And in certain regions, we have some experience. The Middle East is a good example where video banking has become quite common. Just from cultural point of view, people like to see the initial conversation culturally with the face of the bank that they're familiar with, the person in the uniform. And then we can co-pilot those applications with the user and an agent, and then we can hand over the end of that conversation for fulfillment to a bot to automate the completion of whatever the discussion agreed on, to fill in forms or complete the application for credit card or whatever it may be. So video was used for a cultural point of view as opposed to just liking to use the tech.
Got it. Okay, well.
And just building on maybe a comment Rick made relative to use cases, one of the things that we've seen from our side relative to addressing marketers is an increase in proactive outbound service-directed messages. So anticipating a pain point or a need and pushing a piece of communication out that proactively resolves the problem before, frankly, it even occurs. And particularly, during this time of COVID, when the basis of business has changed, whether that's now retail closed or having to ask consumers to do curbside pickup, the ability to proactively message those customers and be able to help them understand this new form of engagement to make the transaction more seamless, we're seeing is a really high growth area in terms of use cases.
I suppose an interesting area off the back of that. So something, even back to what John said a moment ago, can this create a volume problem though for brands? So when they open up these messaging channels, how do they make sure that they've got the right people to be able to respond? So if they do have to be timely, if they have got to be able to provide meaningful feedback, can that create a large influx of communications that maybe they weren't ready for before? Or again, I suppose a bit of experience from any of you on that have seen where you've gone live with a brand and had to deal with how they manage now that influx of communication. That Glen, maybe, I don't know if with
yeah, everyone, and obviously everyone wants AI, right? So the goal here is to get people switched on to use the learning of previous experiences. So people's, if you call first time and you take 10 messages exchanges to solve your problem, you want the platform the next time you come in to take 5 or 6 cycles. So you want it to be an improved experience. And that all comes from the use of machine learning to improve that process each time. And that's the personalization combined with AI you can really get from these type of platforms. So that's the key thing that everyone's seeking. It's maybe, it's going to take some time, but that's what people are looking for the improved experience over time.
And on AI, actually, you mentioned that there. It's an interesting point. I think one of the challenges that AI faced maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago even was that there was a few high-profile cases of AI going slightly wrong, I think, in conversations. How do we feel that the consumer market is with AI now? Is there still this? Do you think people are more accepting of it? Are there rules around making sure that someone knows they're talking to a bot, or what's your take on that now, based on your experience? I suppose Rick, you probably get a lot of that with chat with your products, right? What's your take?
Yeah, that's I mean, bots have gone through a whole hype cycle, right? And the period where you are talking about was 3 years ago, where there were indeed quite some funny stuff going around. I remember that Microsoft bot that just became racist basically on Twitter, because it was just not picking up the right things, or actually people were being racist to the bot, so the bot became racist as well. That was actually one of the famous experiments with Microsoft. And what I think is that a lot of people today, they still don't get the technology in full, because people think sequential. And one of the really, really cool things of AI is that you basically can jump to subjects based on the subjects that are being decided upon by actually the end user. But what you see at the moment is that when many companies are successful, is that they have that in a controlled environment. It's a big misconception that AI is completely humanless. It's not true at all. I mean, the best projects I know in AI have actually people on that technology that steer it towards the way that the customer wants it to behave. And I think that for the coming year or two, maybe even 3 or 4, that will be hugely important to have that. I mean, don't forget the human touch. I know people that say, I want to have an NPS score of 9 at least for all my contact points that I have with customers about my services. Well, I would be the last one to say that you have to botify everything then. No, if you want to have an NPS of 7, 8, automate, use NLP to make sure that's not sequential and tailored actually to the question, and they don't have to go to a lot of different steps that's not relevant to them. Again, relevance, like Matt said, but also make sure that you just have like common, sane human people looking at that from time to time, or even when the bot is not trained for that yet, bring a human in the loop, and that's perfectly fine. And that's one of the misconceptions I see all the time about conversational AI these days.
Which is quite, I think that leads us quite nicely on to, you mentioned there a couple of points where consumers are interacting with bots and driving the conversation. It's often described as P2A, but just in case we've got anyone who's watching who's not familiar with that phrase, it's really the act of a consumer choosing to interact with a brand. Okay, so within the industry, it's often referred to as P2A, so person to application. How do you see that affecting omni-channel strategies? And before anyone answers, I'll just say we have actually got a poll. So if you go to the side of the chat window on the event, you'll see there's an option to post in some questions, which I can see them starting to come through, so we will come back to them in a moment. But there's a poll there around P2A. So while people are hopefully replying to that, can someone give us an intro, a little bit about perhaps how P2A, the methods, but also how that starts affecting the omni-channel strategy, some of the opportunities it presents?
Well, I could comment on the P2A. Really, this is the very important topic, and the discovery in this case is for the consumer is very important as well. How you discover the chatbot, the brand that actually sits on your messaging. We saw the presentation from Apple about the Apple Business Chat. So it's different ways you can do that. But the straightforward way is to have a kind of discovery mechanism inside of messaging. But it doesn't look like it exists at the moment. So you have to go to the outside of messaging to discover the brand, and then from there you can start the conversation, or you can have a sort of backdoor via SMS, send the SMS and start the conversation that way. But it is very important for the consumers to discover brands at the beginning, and also to have the verification of the brand as well. But because you can really have a conversation with not with your bank, but with someone else pretending that you are a bank, and it could go wrong.
Just building on that, I would say that, once the brand decides what channels are appropriate for their customer and their market, in order for this to work, to make that connection with the consumer, the adoption of that channel needs to be integrated throughout the entire rhythm of what the business is. So meaning all the touch points need to invite consumers to, if it's permission-based channel, or a channel that needs to be open to the enterprise needs to take it seriously enough that that channel then is articulated as an open lane for consumers to engage across all the touch points. Often it'll be relegated to just a simple campaign that promotes the channel, or maybe it's in a preference center buried somewhere on the website. And then the traffic never materializes. But in order for it to becoming a meaningful channel and therefore drive the kinds of return and engagement the enterprise expects, it has to be adopted across the brand, across all touch points.
Well, I think that's probably an interesting point then for us to, I want to make sure we've got some time for some of the questions at the end there. So let's move on from there to talking about some of the key steps that an organization, so we know that omnichannel is a thing, the orchestration of channels and brands choosing their channels, but how is an organization today, how do they take that next step? What are the things they need to consider? Perhaps how do they build the business case? Who wants to take over from there?
I think the channel, ultimately the channel they use is going to be decided by the end customer. So you want to make sure you're putting as many customers into the mix to start with as possible, so the funnel is as big as possible. And then from our point of view, what you're trying to do there is build an experience from a business process point of view, as opposed to trying to optimize that one-off experience. We want the solution we provide to be replicable, even if people hop between channels. So making it a designed business process to change this environment is quite important, rather than to try and adopt a single point solution that might just live for a while and then be recreated or modified. We do try to make sure that everyone understands what impact this business process has on the big business, to try and move the conversation up in value as much as possible in the organization. But that's one way we look at it, to try and start the initial phase.
I would also just build that the good news for enterprise is that there are a number of excellent solution providers that can really make channel selection easy. And so I would say this is also an environment where there's test and learn. And once you identify what you think are the handful of channels that are going to best drive engagement with your consumer, then making a partnership with enterprise grade solution provider could then help you test and learn across multiple channels. So great opportunities for experiments and measurement to drive both customer satisfaction and driving engagement, ultimately conversion.
How do the commercial models work in this world where you do have so many different channels? They all have slightly different models. Is that an area that a brand needs to worry about up front, or is that perhaps part of the selection criteria, choosing someone that can help you with just using the channels as and when you need them, or what's the?
Yeah, again, I think going to a single provider, and there are a handful of excellent ones, they help take that mystery and help manage all of that on behalf of the enterprise.
Okay, I think that you've made an interesting point there, Glenn, about the difference between a campaign and a business process. I think it's quite interesting. We quite often in our industry talk about campaigns and driving campaigns, but I think you're right. There's actually, it's a different way of thinking when you consider it as a business process, because that never stops. It's not a short period of time. It's not a fixed number of messages that are going out the door. It's a part of your business that's going to be there for forevermore. So I think that's quite an interesting change of view of how we look at it.
I think just to comment on that, Michael, I think to Rick's point before, you see more progressive enterprise and organizations have that customer experience role, right? I think more traditional is the marketing department, is the customer care department. And if that's the way the organization's set up, those two really need to come together to think about adopting these channels, because you do the outbound reach, well, then you're going to get inbound on that same channel that marketing aren't going to touch or know what to do with. So you need that to go somewhere else. So those organizations that are adopting that, okay, I need a customer experience specialist that can look at that journey across my entirety of the business, I think is key.
Really important point. Agree.
And I would even go one step further. I truly believe that a lot of companies, they will invest just like they invest in certain development platforms to build their workflow management on top, just to the point of Glen. They will work on, and they will buy platforms to build conversational experiences on, and to publish what they normally would publish on a website or on a software app or on a mobile app. They will publish that in mobile channels and just evolve on that continuously.
Well, thank you for all that, and we will come back to a final wrap-up point just before we close. But let's tackle some of the questions. The first one is from Andy Jones. I think Sergei, you can probably have this one, right? What's the difference between omni-channel and multi-channel?
Well, to be honest, from my point of view, it's very, very similar. Especially in looking at the mobile device, you have all the multi-channels that you can address your customers on, and the omni-channel very, very similar to that.
Is it probably fair to say as well, I think, so listening to some of the conversation and the points you've made today, that actually an omni-channel solution or an omni-channel approach is perhaps trying to create, you're trying to solve a business process regardless of the channel, whereas in a multi-channel solution, how you solve it could vary quite differently per channel. You're not, is there a difference there almost perhaps in how you tackle?
Yes, it's probably, you're probably correct. Yes, this is the.
I would argue our industry gets hung up on that terminology, where
yes,
one begins with M, one begins with O.
Yes, that's a very fair point. Yes, I think that's it. Ultimately, it's all about improving the customer engagement, the customer experience, isn't it? And I think whether you're doing that through, as you say, Matt earlier, whether it's through one channel, whether it's through multiple channels, ultimately the goal is to improve customer engagement.
Yes,
right, here we go. We've got another one. How to onboard the customer and decide which is the best channel inside an omni-channel solution. So, how do you decide which is the best channel? Or do we? Is it the customer's choice?
Well, I would argue there's a lot of research, syndicated research available that can define that by, demographics, age segments, markets, is a really good starting point. And then, as I mentioned, my view would be test, learn, and optimize.
Yeah, a lot of it today is conversion from the legacy channels. So it is a lot of voice incoming calls that need to be redirected. And if you can take automation to some of those and manage them, that's generally drive someone down a path that you want to use a channel for a certain type of communication. So you have some control over it, but not ultimate control over that.
It's an open question, right? You can answer in many ways. I think to onboard a customer, I'm assuming that means an enterprise, a brand. And onboarding can mean many things, but let's assume it's onboarding to a channel. And then there's processes and providers that can help customers with that in terms of verification of the brand, the logo, the look, feel, tone, personality, all that kind of good stuff of onboarding. And then choosing the best channel. I think to Matt said there's lots of data points out there, but I think a lot of it comes down to common sense and right? So if you're primarily operating in the Japanese market, you focus on Line or ICS, or Korea, it's KakaoTalk, or if it's Brazil, India, maybe WhatsApp or RCS. So I think a lot of it comes down to where are your audience and how do you best serve the audience in that channel in the easiest to consume way.
So geographics, demographics, and pick a supplier that can support all the channels that are relevant to your customers, perhaps is the trick there. Do you believe that the orchestration of omnichannel capabilities into one single platform will add competitive value advantage?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that was fairly quick. I think that's it, isn't it? Let's face it. If you can consolidate your messaging strategies, your customer engagement strategies, you can be more consistent, and ultimately that makes it more measurable and more understandable. So even if the direct value doesn't come from your initial movement into omnichannel, you've got a way now to be able to modify what you do and understand the variables and where you can improve your process. So I think I would have to say moving to a single platform certainly makes that a lot easier.
Just as a pragmatic example, Michael, to help the audience, I think we often find a new brand venturing into some of these channels, they might not have the media assets for the given channel. Never mind, if they're a global brand operating in multiple markets on different channels, now they need to adapt their media based on what that channel can support and types and so forth. So that orchestration, I'd say, is much broader than just the UX or customer journey, but then it's also what do those channels support and how do you deliver that content in the right way so it doesn't look horrible. So yeah, one platform for me is a no-brainer.
Yeah, and also there's some pitfalls. Some of these use cases demand that the infrastructure is behind a firewall or behind a corporate environment because of some of the CRM integration that may be done. So if you really want to tightly integrate it with your back-end systems in your company, then it makes sense you have to try and find a way to choose a platform that can do that and service that requirement as well. So the security aspect is quite important.
Great stuff. Right, we are not far from the end. So just a little bit of feedback on the poll. So we put a poll out during this chat, which was how would you want your customers to find and start messaging your organization? And we put the examples on there were in-app directories, so such as the Samsung WhatsApp, iMessage, something along those lines. Search engines, all of the above, so we'll come back to that in a second. Maps, so I think the idea of searching for a brand and being able to initiate the conversation through a map, personally I quite like that one. And dedicated brand directories, so such as Kirusa's .go, for example, or maybe even Yale could move into something like that in the future. And I would have to say the hands down winner is in-app directories. So that came back with a large number of people voted for that. Search engines came second, and maps and dedicated brand directories came near the end. So why do you think that might be? Because I personally, for me, maps would be the first place I would probably want to initiate a conversation with a brand from, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. What's your take on that?
Yeah, we've done a lot of this in Japan and working on it in North America as well. So this is really important, I think, for brands to be able to get to a position in the application where they can be represented by their size, by their status. So that's really important, that people find their most associated brands in this directory in a position that they would expect to find them in, and it also allows people to go and do the discovery rather than have A2P push. People are more trustworthy if they find something in a directory for a brand they're already associated with, than receive a message for someone who wants to do business with them who they might not have decided to do business with on their own tech. So directories are just a more valuable way to get the conversation started. Finding a brand, interacting with that brand via chatbot is a more end user driven. You're likely to have a more qualified opportunity at the back of that.
So for any of the chat client producers out there, if you happen to be watching, make sure you build your bot directories within your apps. That seems to be the message from our poll. Right, we're nearly at time. So just as a quick once around the room, can I just get a final comment from everyone on what's your top takeaway for an organization that's watching today and wants to actually start their journey with Omnichannel? If we start with, let's go with Rick first. Go on, off you go.
Well, if I could make one statement, I think it's about customer experience and making sure that you start from that and then later on decide the channel that's right for you instead of the other way around. And I see a lot of brands doing it the other way around today. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Sergei, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look at the use case first, then look at the your customers, demographics, where they are, what they're using, when they're using it during the day, and then decide what channel you want to actually use for your specific use case.
Thank you. Good stuff. And Matt, I'm just trying to see which order everyone's in on the screen here, but let's go with Matt. You go next.
Yeah, no problem. And just to echo my prior comments, all of these channels are privileged channels. So ensure that content is personalized and relevant to the end user.
Great stuff. John, go on in.
Quickly, I think it's a no-brainer for brands to adopt some of these more richer media conversational channels, so that shouldn't be in question. I would just urge the brand to think about that. You've then presented a door to your customer to then contact you any time of the day with any problem, and make sure you have a response strategy to that inbound question.
And finally, Glenn, if you can close us down.
Yeah, I think make sure it's a business process, and make sure you collect the data to learn from it so that you can improve the experience and personalize it. As Matt said, the next time the customer comes back, it gets better.
Brilliant. Right, well, we are definitely at time. So before they just cut us off air, just one last time. So thank you to all of you on the panel. Thank you to everyone who's been watching today and asking questions, much appreciated. We hope you found this chat about Omnichannel valuable. And if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us, either through the virtual booths in Umbrella, or of course your messaging channel of choice. But other than that, I think stay tuned. We've got a great session coming up next, creating seamless customer experiences with multi-channel orchestration. So should tie in quite nicely to some of the topics we've been talking about over the last hour. But otherwise, goodbye, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the Mobile Ecosystem Forum Connects Rich Communications.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Michael.
Bye. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.